everybody, welcome to our live crochet event. I am Brenda KB Anderson and I'm very excited today to show you guys how to make my version of a beanie, which I'm calling the Freestyle Beanie, because today is going to be unlike most of the other lives that I do, in which we don't actually have a real pattern that we're working from. Okay, so there is a pattern download, but really it's not a pattern, it's more like an explanation of the process with some photos in there to help guide you guys along. And then also at the end there's kind of like a little gallery of some photos of the hats that I made, all the different kind of styles I made, and explaining like what yarn I used and a little bit about the details of them. So that's what's in the download, so you can go ahead and download that. That's free, freestyle, and we'll get started. So in case you are like brand new to crochet, this is the project for you. This is a very straightforward, approachable, it's just an awesome project for a total beginner, because first of all, you don't need to learn how to read a pattern yet. You can just dive right in. Second of all, you don't have to worry too much about getting the perfect gauge. You're just gonna make it up as you go, and if that just scares you a little bit, don't worry, it's gonna be fine. And the third, you just can kind of make it your own, and it's a really good experience. It's like the perfect amount of crochet space to kind of like learn what you're doing by the end, but also not get bored of what you're doing. So it's a great first time project, but you know, if you've been crocheting for a long time, there's also going to be some little tidbits in here for you. Also, at the end, when I talk about how I personalized my hats, I'm just going to get you guys thinking about how to kind of make this your own, some different ideas on how to kind of personalize them. Because when I was pulling this together, I was thinking that I was imagining, you know, like, hey, it's October, it's going to be mid-October. This is going to be like prime time for people to be making holiday gifts. And I wanted to give you guys like basically a path, something that you can reach for when you're just kind of stuck and you don't really know what to make someone, because people love beanies and there's so much room for personalization, and we're going to talk all about that later. But it's a really great, basically a great trick to have up your sleeve, to know how to make one of these beanies without using a pattern. You can use any yarn you want. It's going to be fun. Okay, so this of course is a live event. Hello. If you want to say hi to me, then just drop that in the chat box. I'd love to see you guys in there. And if you have questions about what I'm working on, you know, definitely put the questions in there and I will answer them during this live event. If you have any suggestions, or also if you have ideas about how you would like to personalize a hat, I am all ears. I love it when you guys participate, and you know, you add so much to these live events. That's why I love doing them, because all the people watching have a lot of knowledge all put together, and we can all learn so much from each other. So please put any ideas you have in the chat box. So without further ado, let's talk about this hat. So a special note to you guys who are brand new. Normally when you're making a project, a lot of times you will be following somebody's pattern and they have like the specific yarn listed in there and a specific hook that they used in order to get a gauge. A gauge just means like you make a little tiny sample of the fabric with the hook and the yarn suggested, and then you see if your sample is the same size as the person who made the pattern, because if it's not, what that means is your hat is not going to be the same size as the person who wrote the pattern's hat. So you have to kind of you have to switch up your hook size, or change your yarn thickness, or you know, there's some different things that you can do, but eventually you have to be able to get the same gauge as the person who wrote the pattern, or you have to kind of rewrite the pattern to make it all work out, just to make sure that you get something that fits. And in this version of a beanie, that is just kind of out the window. So if you've never shopped for yarn before and you are just like, I don't know what to get, I'm going to give you some suggestions. And I'm going to kind of show you the difference that the yarn weight can make. So yarn weight, it actually means like how thick your yarn is. So when you're working it up with your crochet hook, you'll get bigger stitches with the thicker yarn, smaller stitches with the thinner yarn. So let me just show you 3 of the examples that I used in my project so far. This is a number 6. It's called a number 6. It's a super bulky yarn. This is called a number 5. This is a chunky yarn, or sometimes called a bulky yarn. And this is a number 4. This is a worsted weight yarn or medium weight yarn. So you can see there's a difference here. This is thicker, a little bit thinner, even a little bit more thin. And what I'm talking about when I'm saying those numbers, what I'm actually talking about is there's like a standard that usually is on the yarn labels now. If you take a look at this yarn label, there's this cute little adorable little skein of yarn with a number in the middle right there. This one says a 4 medium. So this one came from this yarn actually, this gray yarn here. And it's telling you kind of the general thickness of the yarn. Okay, so a 4 is a very versatile yarn. People use this all the time for afghans, hats, mittens, all kinds of, sweaters, all kinds of stuff. And the bigger the number, so this was a 4, this was a 5, and this was a 6. But the bigger the number, the thicker the yarn. So, and usually what that means is you're going to be going up a hook size as well, or more than a hook size. You're going to be changing your hook size. So if you're thinking, I don't know, how do I know what kind of hook to get when I'm at the store? I'm going to give you some ideas. So if you're brand new, I would suggest you stick with a number 4 or a number 5 just to do your very first project. If you're not new to this, then you just go raid your yarn stash and come right back. So number 4, number 5, and hooks that would go along with that. For a number 4, usually I use like a 4 millimeter hook or a 5 millimeter hook, a G or an H, for this thickness of yarn. And you can see the thickness of the yarn is similar to the shaft of the crochet hook, that for me anyway, but everybody crochets differently. So you may find as you're working this up that you do not like the fabric it's making. Maybe there's a lot of holes between your stitches and you're like, that's gonna be a cold hat, and it doesn't wanna spring back into shape. Then you need to go down a hook size or 2 until you get a fabric that you like. If you're working it up and it's like really hard to get your hook into the stitches and it's just super tight and you feel like it's not gonna have a nice shape on your head, it's making a fabric that's really really sturdy, but it's not very flexible, then you can go up a hook size or 2 to just kind of adjust for that. That's how we change our gauge. That's what that's called. So like how many stitches per inch or how many stitches per 4 inches. Okay, so if you're gonna start with a chunky weight yarn or a bulky weight, this is a number 5, I would recommend maybe trying out a 6 millimeter hook or a 6.5 millimeter hook, like a J or a K, first to see how that goes. But depending on what yarn you use, there is a lot of difference actually in the thickness of yarns. Even if it is all, say you have like 3 kinds of yarn, they're all labeled a number 5. There can still be quite a big variety of sizes within that number 5. So just know that you have to be willing to change up your hook size to get the fabric that you want. Okay, but these are pretty good, general beginning ideas of working with these sizes of hooks. Okay, but you can choose whatever yarn you want, whatever hook size gets you a fabric that you like. All right, so I am using in this project, or in this collection here, I used 100% worsted weight wool. I used 100% acrylic, and I think this might be an acrylic alpaca blend. I'm not really sure, but a blend of yarn here. And they have they all have different textures and feels to them. So that will also kind of change how your beanie wears and how it feels. If you have a looser spun yarn, something that's fluffy and lofty, it's probably going to have more drape to it when you crochet it up. This is what I made in that yarn. It's very poofy and drapey. If you choose a yarn that's a little more solid, it's going to have a more solid texture to it. So that also affects your project. But if you're beginning and you're feeling like, I'm overwhelmed already, just back up a little bit. It's okay. Just choose some yarn and make a beanie, and then you will learn as you go. The more beanies you make, the more you're going to learn about how the properties of the yarn kind of translate into the finished properties of the beanie. Alrighty, so, we've got lots of hellos. Melissa saying hello from Manchester, Kentucky. Julie saying hi from Alabama, and Linda from Kokomo, hats for families. Yes, you can make, I'm guessing you're asking if you can make a bunch of different sizes, and you can make any size you want, and I'm going to be showing you how to do that. I think that's what you're asking. And Shatika is saying, happy crocheting, y'all. Happy crocheting. Thanks for popping in. Joan is saying hello from Connecticut. Babu says, love the sweater you're wearing. Thank you. Would love to make the hat. Is it also crocheted or knit? It is crocheted. This is a crochet project. And Melissa says, I love having lots of options for quick and easy hats. Either my family misplaces one or I donate one to a homeless shelter. Yes, me too. Me too. I have lots of hats, and that is just one of my go-to projects. I love making them. I love gifting them. I love donating them because they're easy, and you can, especially this version of the hat, you can make these while you're watching TV. It's just super simple. All right, so let me get started on actually making this hat. I am going to be using this yarn here. This is a chunky weight, a number 5, and I am using a K hook, which is a 6.5 millimeter hook. And so when you start on your hat, you can think about, first you want to think about, after you've gotten your materials, first you want to think about what size you want to make your hat. So if you already have a hat that you want to make it about the same size, then you can grab that hat. If you do not have a hat, then you can use a tape measure and just kind of guess. So here is, let's say that I wanted to make a hat that was this size. Sometimes it's hard to just measure straight up here, especially if you have the kind of hat that this one's been kind of sitting flat in a pile for a while, so it's very flattened. But sometimes your hat's really bubbly and it's kind of hard to know, like, how do you measure that? Usually what I do is I fold it so that it's kind of in half like this, and then it makes a better point at the top. And then I just measure from the top, from the center top to the bottom. So this was 8 inches. And then if you want to add anything on here, for the fold over part, which I do recommend, and I'll tell you why in just a minute, then you're going to add that on there as well. So we'll say, like, if we were taking 8 inches and then we would add 3 inches onto that. So that would be 11 inches. So we would want to make our foundation chain 11 inches to start with. The reason that I'm saying I recommend adding this, of course, you can decide if you want this or not. But if you're like brand new, and you're kind of like on the fence about whether you want this fold up part, I would recommend putting this on there because not only is it going to keep your ears warmer, but also because that way when you're working your piece, we're going to be working up and down the length of the hat. If it isn't exactly the perfect height when you try it on later, then you can fold it up a little more. If you just make it to the height that you want it to be, and let's just say it's just like 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch too long or something and it just kind of bothers you, then you can't really fold that amount up, But if you already have a fold up section, you could certainly fold it up just a little bit more, just to make it to the perfect height. So that's why I really like making them with this extra fold up area. I mean, besides that I live in a very cold place and I really like having that extra double layer warmth there. Plus it's cute. And then as we'll talk about later, it just makes decorating them a little bit easier too, or adding a little bit of personality to your hats a little bit easier too if you add that. All right, so if we wanted to make our hat 11 inches tall, let's see, we would just go ahead and make a foundation chain, and I'll show you how to do that in case you are brand new. So we're going to take our strand of yarn and we're going to draw a little loop like this. Then we're going to take this loop and we're going to flip it over onto the strand of yarn that is connected to the ball. Okay, so we're just going to take it, flip it over onto that strand, and then we're going to place our hook underneath that middle strand like this. And then I'm going to place my finger right where all these yarns kind of cross around each other to just kind of hold that. Put my thumb there too. And I'm just going to tighten that up. So this is a very long and kind of sloppy loop. We want to tighten that up. So we just pull on the strand that's connected to the ball until it's close to our hook. Okay, it should be able to slide easily. You should be able to hold it down here and slide it back and forth. But it shouldn't be like falling off your hook. Okay, so that's kind of how I usually like to start. Then to make a chain, we're just going to wrap our yarn around the back and over the top of our hook, and then we're going to pull it through this chain. And you watch what happens. Now, This is one of those things where you can absolutely do it your own way. And a lot of you watching this are like, yes, I've made the foundation chain before, okay. But for those of you who might be absolutely brand new, it really helps to watch someone do this. And when you're watching me, you can see that I'm gonna be moving my hand back and forth to make that chain, because it's hard, like when you're holding it here, you can't just pull it through. So when you make that chain, you're gonna wrap it around. Then I'm going to use these fingers to pinch that loop, and I'm going to grab it with the hook. I'm pulling on my hook just a little to make this loop a little longer, and then I'm gonna turn the nose of my hook downward to pull it through that chain. Okay, and I twisted it back up. So wrap it around, watch these fingers here, grabbing onto that, and pulling through. Now, everybody has a different way to do this. This is not the only way. There's a million different ways to do this. You can do it however feels comfortable, but you have to just, be making those chains, getting those loops to go through. These are just tips that I have for, trying to figure out how to kind of hold things when you're just brand new. And you can see I can hold the yarn and the strand in my left hand and just do a little yarn over pulling with my right hand for a few stitches. Then it starts to get unwieldy when it's too far away, and I gotta grab again. All right, so we're just gonna chain, and if you're brand new to crocheting, you may find that these chains get really tight. If on your next row, it's really hard to work into those, make sure you go up a hook size just for this part. This is called the foundation chain. All right, so we're just chaining along until we're to the right height of our hat. Let me back up for a second because, we've got lots more hellos. Hello, Cindy from Central Pennsylvania. And let's see. And Eleanor says hello. Chniqua says hi from Chicago. Bookkeeper 73, hi from Canada. Paula from Texas, hello everybody. And Fiona from Scotland, hi. I went to Scotland once and it was amazing. Okay, so let me back up for a second because I was gonna explain the whole tape measure thing when I told you could just measure your invisible hat. If you don't have a hat that you like the shape of or the height of or how it fits you, then you can go ahead and take a measurement off your head. So this is gonna be a little bit awkward because I meant to bring a head form so I could show you on that, but I'm just gonna use my head. So you're just gonna find the point on which, like, you could find the front where you're gonna wear your hat. Say I wanted my hat to be here, and I'm just kind of imagining, when you wear a hat, usually the very center top of the hat kind of comes a little bit more to the back. So you just have to kind of imagine where that's gonna go, and you just have kind of measure the air. Like say I wanted to wear a hat and I wanted my beanie to stick up off my head just a little bit, then I would take a look at that and be like, okay, that's 8.5 inches. And then I would use that plus however many inches I want for this fold over brim. Okay, so that's a place to start as well, just measuring the air on your head. Or if you're making these for someone else, you can ask for a measurement, you can ask them to measure their head from like their eyebrow to the back of their neck, and then you can take the halfway point between that and know that that is going to be a hat that's close to their head, and then if you want a little extra height, you can add some inches onto that. Because if you tell someone, okay, measure here and go up in the air, they might be like, what? Unless you show them this video, which you could do. Have them take the measurement that way. Okay, so let's see. Oh, Mary says, hi, Brenda here from Maryland. My first time actually live. Also having trouble with hat size. Hope to get some tips. Okay. Well, this hat should fit you because we're going to be, that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to make sure that the hat fits. And it's really, really easy. This is a good trick to make your hat sideways. Okay, so let's see. We're at almost 11. I'm going to chain one more on for 11. And then because we all crochet a little bit differently, and on the next pass when we work into these stitches, sometimes that tightens your chain up and shortens it a little. I add just a few stitches onto that so that it measures about 1 inch longer. We'll just say a little bit more. When in doubt, just add a few extra. Because when we work across this, we want to make sure that we don't run out, that we don't work all the way across and then it's too short, because that would be a bummer, and then we have to pull that out and do it again. which I mean is good practice, but that's annoying, so let's not do that. All right, so now we are going to start working in the half double crochet stitch pattern. So if you take a look at your chain, there's a whole bunch of V's all stacked up like this, kind of facing this way. If you roll that over so the V's are on the table, you'll see all these little horizontal dashes on the back of your chain. Okay, this is called the back of your chain. Also, sometimes people call it the bottom, back bump, bottom bump. There's a bunch of different names for it. Okay, so we are going to skip the first one, which is right here by my thumb, and then we're going to work underneath the next one. So in order to make a half double crochet, we're going to yarn over, just like we did when we were chaining, and then we are going to, and you can see I'm going to hold this with my finger, then we're going to insert our hook from front to back underneath that horizontal bump, and then we're going to yarn over again. So our yarn is always coming across our hook like this, and then we're going to pull through, and then we're going to yarn over, and then we're going to pull through all 3 stitches like that. Okay, so that is called a half double crochet. We're going to keep doing that. So we're going to yarn over, and then we're going to insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 3. And especially if you're newer with crochet, but even if you're not, it's a good practice to just mark your very first stitch of your row so that you don't get confused later and add an extra stitch or miss this stitch, because that's what makes our rows uneven, or one of the things that could make our rows uneven. All right, so now we are going to continue working half double crochet all the way across our chain, just like that. Okay, so yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through 3. This is one of what I think of as the 4 basic stitches in crochet. I mean, there's like a gazillion stitches in crochet, and there's, you know, even more stitch patterns that come out of combinations of those stitches. But usually people learn the single crochet stitch first, but this has just got one extra little yarn over, and it's easy enough for someone to do that little yarn over before they insert their hook and yarn over and pull through their 3. So this is a good one to start with, and I feel like half double crochet, for some reason it helps people keep their stitches from getting as tight as single crochet stitches. So if people can handle that little beginning yarn over, which most people can, I like to recommend that people start with half double crochet, because it just seems like it's a little bit less likely to get too tight. I think it's because of the extra yarn over. That is one of the problems when you're just beginning to crochet, is you're usually, for most people, your tension gets really tight, and then it gets hard for you to insert your hook. So if you're finding yourself really having to push, like you're doing this and that, and trying to get it through that little loop right there, then I know it seems like you're undoing and you're going back in time, but that's okay. Just undo your yarn by pulling on it, find a larger hook and do your chain, and then switch back to this hook for doing this first pass at it. That's one of those things that, you know, the more you do it, the more you're going to be able to control that tension, and things will get much easier for you. You get the muscle memory, and then you'll be able to zoom across. All right, we are getting pretty close to the end. So I am going to go ahead and measure my piece, and we'll see what happened here. Okay, so there's 11 right there. So I'm going to add just one more stitch, and that should be what I wanted it to be. Okay, so yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 3. And now you might be thinking, what the heck? Am I going to have this ugly thing hanging off of my hat? We didn't plan for that, but we can undo this really easily. So this is one of those things where, you know, if you ever have to make a super long chain to begin something, you could do a foundation chain. But if you're not into that, or you don't know how to do that, and you want to do a regular chain like this, and you're like, ooh, did I get enough stitches in there? I'm not sure. You can just add some more and then undo them later, okay? If you've never done this before, it's kind of a little aha moment. So you just kind of loosen that little knot, and then you can pull this out. You're just basically uncrocheting your work. Okay, you just want to make sure you don't pull on anything too tight before you realize, I mean, unless you know that you're undoing, you know, that the strand you're pulling on is going to undo your work, because you could accidentally knot it too much. So just pull on it a little and make sure that you know which strand it is that's that's pulling out. All right, there we are at the very end. So we've undone our stitches, and now it looks great. Okay, so now we're going to do the next row. So we are going to chain 2. And if you've been crocheting for a while and you already have, if you usually just chain 1 for your next row, you can go ahead and do that. A lot of times people recommend you chain 2. I used to only chain 1 because I felt like chaining 2 made my initial, like the edge of my crochet work a little bit kind of wobbly. It wasn't very neat and tidy. So I switched to just chaining 1, but then I went back to chaining 2 and chaining 2 very tightly because I feel like it looks even better for me the way that I crochet. So I'm going to chain 2. So I'm going to just yarn over and pull through, yarn over and pull through. And in this, the way that I do this, I want to say pattern, but it's not really a pattern, but in the way that I do this, I never count that as a stitch. We never work into that. We just use this as a little ladder to get up high enough so that we can work the next row. So after we chain 2, we're going to turn our work like we're just turning a page in a book like that. And now we are going to work across our stitches that we just made. So normally when we crochet under 2 loops. So we would make a half double crochet like this underneath 2 loops right there. But in this pattern, we're going to be working in a ribbed stitch, which is a half double crochet through the back loop only, which means we're only going through this back loop. See how there's a V here? We're just placing our hook underneath that back loop. So these 2 chains, like I said before, we're never going to work into those. So we're skipping those 2 chains. We're going to yarn over, insert through that back loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through all 3 loops. Okay? And then we can go ahead and mark that because that was our first stitch. And now we're going to continue working those half double crochets all the way across. So yarn over, insert through the back loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 3. Yarn over, insert through the back loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 3. Okay, so we're just going to continue working those half double crochets all the way across. You can see that leaving that front loop open is creating this little ridge here, and then your eye is kind of drawn to this little V shape, which is kind of a nice little detail. Hello to Kelly who has joined us, and also Wanda Jones from North Carolina. It's her first time here. Welcome. I'm so glad you guys are here. All right, so I'm just working half double crochets through that back loop all the way across to the end, and we will end with our very last stitch, which has a stitch marker in it. So at this point, after you do your first row across, when you're doing your second row, you also want to check and see if that is changing the length of your hat. So this is something that can definitely happen, especially if you're newer to crocheting. And as you start to stitch, you start getting more relaxed, or you start getting more used to where to put your hook, or you're holding something differently. All these things, those can change how many stitches per inch you end up with. So that's going to change the height of your hat. So you just want to kind of check in after each of the first maybe 2-3 rows and measure and just see if you're still on track. And so this is another reason it's nice to add that fold up brim, because if you have that, then you can fold it up a little more or a little less if it changes height a little bit. So that way you don't have to worry. So we're still at 11 for me, but for some people this might get tighter. Probably for a lot of people it's going to get looser, so it's going to start to bend like that. So you're going to want to trust the more recent rows. The very beginning, actually, the very beginning row is going to, that's going to be more affected by like making that initial chain and working into that chain. It can just be a little bit of a problem. All right, so after you get that second row, and then you can just keep on doing the same exact thing. You're going to chain 2, 1 and 2, turn your work, and then you're going to work into those back bumps, making those same stitches, half double crochets all the way across. back and forth and back and forth until you make a big rectangle. So at this point, I want to tell you this is a little bit of extra credit. So this is something, if you're not as new to crocheting and you want to learn another stitch, if you make your first row across in single crochet, that is going to make, when we sew this beanie together later, we're going to be doing one seam. When we sew the beanie together, it's going to make the seam a lot less noticeable, and I'll show you why when we get there. But I'm going to back this up and I'm going to show you how to begin by working single crochet across the very first row. In case you're brand new and you've never made a single crochet, then we're going to do that right now. You really can do it either way. I had been making beanies for years with half double crochet and then just half double crochet through the back loop over and over and over. And then only recently did I discover that I really like substituting that just the first row with a single crochet row. So to do single crochet, again, we're going to skip that first dash and we're going to work into the second one. Insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. So this is very similar to that half double crochet, except we don't have that initial yarn over. Okay, so we're going to insert our hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. Insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. Okay, so you would just make the entire first row with single crochet instead of the half double crochet. And the reason that this tends to hide your seam a little bit better is because you have this initial foundation chain. That thickness plus the thickness of that very first row, we really want that to look like the height of a half double crochet row. So half double crochets, are a little tiny bit taller than a single crochet. So that's why I have kind of modified my method here recently, in the last couple of months, to doing a single crochet across that foundation chain, because later on when you see us doing our little seam, you'll see it'll blend in a little bit better. All right, so let me just check in with my questions here. Okay, see, Wolfpack is saying, yes, mind blown, never thought of this, and I wonder, Cindy, I'm wondering what you were talking about. Just making the hat sideways, or was it this single crochet thing? I'm not sure when your question came through. Oh my goodness, I never knew I could undo. Oh, I bet you're talking about undoing the chain stitch, because the next comment was undoing the chain stitch. Yes, that was like a little aha moment for me. I have been crocheting for years before I even realized you could just undo that. I don't know why more people don't talk about that, because it's so much better to just add those extra chains in there and then just undo them later. It's kind of funny. And Kathy is saying she loves how I explain the process. Awesome. Yeah, I wanted this to be very approachable for everybody, especially those newer crocheters, but I know that some of you who've been crocheting for a long time, hopefully you'll be finding some little tidbits in here too. Okay, so I've worked that single crochet all the way across, and at this point it's going to be the same as what I had showed you before, where we chain 2 to turn. We're going to turn our work like turning a page in a book, and then we're going to work half double crochets through that back loop. Okay, so we yarn over, skip those 2 turning chains, insert our hook under the back loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 3, and then continue, yarn over, insert into that back loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 3. Okay, so we would just continue working those half double crochets through that back loop all the way across. And now either way you start out, if you start out with the single crochet on that first row or a half double crochet on that first row, just to keep things simple, either way it's fine. And then after that, you are going to always be working into that back loop. So every time you turn your work, you're going to work into the back loop. So let me get to the end here, and then I'll show you what that looks like when we turn and work the other way. Oh, and Amy is also chiming in about undoing the crochet chain. Yeah, it's kind of funny, like, it's just one of those things. I've been doing that for a while, ever since I had my aha moment, but I kind of forget that, not everybody knows about that, and I should be sharing more tips like that that I just do automatically without thinking. Okay, so here we are at the end of our row, working our very last half double crochet, and then we would chain 2, and I like to chain those kind of tightly to keep my edge nice and even, turn my work, and then again work into the back loop. So every time you're working into the back loop, what I mean is you're working through the back loop as you are facing it. So this was the front loop before when we worked across, but now that's the back loop. So we're always going to be working through that loop that's further away from us when we're working on this in this kind of style here. Okay, so we're just working underneath that back loop, making those half double crochet stitches all the way across. All right, so we will just work back and forth, making a big rectangle. Let me show you what it looks like. So this one, I think I started this one out as a hat for me. This is actually a kid's size hat. So this is going to look a little bit wider. I think it's probably taller than 11 inches, so don't be alarmed. But it's the same process. And I just wanted to show you this is about the right size for me. And the way that you know if it's the right size is 2 things you can do. First thing you can do is you can measure the circumference of your head and then subtract about 2 or 3 inches. So if you're using just depending on how tightly you want your hat to fit or how much stretch your fabric has. See, it has quite a bit of stretch. But if you're using a yarn that doesn't want to stretch as much, then you're going to want to maybe only subtract about 2 inches. If you're using a very springy yarn, probably 3 would be better, 3 inches from your head measurement. But having said that, this is like for a larger child to a larger adult size, subtract about that much. If you're making a little kid's beanie or a baby's beanie, then maybe only subtract somewhere between 2 inches or 1 inch, really. I mean, and their little heads are gonna grow and they're gonna fill up that hat anyway. So if you don't subtract that much and it's a little bit loose to begin with, it'll fit in like a month anyway, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. So anywhere really between 1 inch for a baby or 2 inches for a child or an adult, but I would err on the side of 2 inches for a baby and 3 inches for a child or adult. So that's how much it should be smaller than your circumference, than your head circumference. So if you measure around your head circumference where you're wearing your hat, and then subtract 3 inches from that or 2 inches from that, then you should be good. The other way, and this is much more foolproof, if you are making it for yourself or for someone you have access to their head, then you would just crochet back and forth until you've worked an even number of rows. So either way, you have to work an even number of rows. And I'll go a little bit more into that in just a second. And then you can just pin your hat together, or you could even slip stitch it together. If you're a more seasoned crocheter, you could probably do that even quicker than pinning it to make that tube. And then you're going to try that on. So that way you can feel what it feels like. You can fold up the brim, feel what that feels like. And then you know that, if that's the right circumference for you. That's the beauty of making the hat in this way, is that the hat is going to wrap around your head like this. We are going to be cinching the top of the hat together. And then, of course, folding up the brim. That's what it does. But that's why I love making hats sideways, first of all, because the ribbing looks so nice this way and it's nice and stretchy in that direction, but also because you just keep going until it's the right size. And then if you worked too many rows, you can just remove 2 rows. Or if it's a little bit tight, then you can add 2 rows, okay? So let's go back to the how to know if it's an even number thing, an even number of rows. So when you first start out, this is my beginning tail down here on this corner. So this is 1 row, this is the 2nd row, 3rd row, 4th row. So every time you get into like a little valley here, that is 2 rows. So here's 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. So you can count up by 2s. You can say 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, and then know how many rows you have, whether it's odd or even. And that is, it's actually kind of a nice thing to do, is to count that up, and then you can jot that down if you want to make another hat that's exactly the same size. You basically designed your own hat, and you have your own hat pattern to follow for next time if you use the same kind of yarn and same hook. But the other thing you can do to know if this is an even or odd number of rows is your beginning yarn tail will be here, on this corner, and then diagonally across, your ending yarn tail should be over here if you've worked an even number of rows. So if you don't feel like counting it, you're like, this is the only yarn that I have that's, that I'm going to be using up. I don't need to write this down. I don't need to care. Then you can just make sure your hook is ending at this opposite corner. It has to be diagonally across from where your beginning yarn tail is. Okay, and so I wanted to show you, especially for you newer crocheters, what happens when you use up your ball of yarn and you have to start another ball of yarn, because that could happen to you. These hats, you might be able to get a hat out of a larger skein, but you also, if you're using a smaller skein of yarn, or maybe you're using scraps or something like that, or a chunkier yarn, you might have to add a second skein to your work. And if you've never done that before, it can just be like, oh my gosh, how do I even start with that? So I want to show you how to do it. Let's just say we were running out of yarn right here, and we need to join some yarn. So all you need to do is, before you completely run out of yarn, you can make your last stitch. So we'll just yarn over, insert, and then there's lots of different ways to do this. But the way that I would recommend doing it is, when you're going to do that last yarn over and pull through, you just lay you lay the old strand on there, and then you lay the new one on there too. So here's the beginning tail of my new strand of yarn. It's just laying across my hook. And then we're just going to yarn over and pull through. Whoops. Hang on, let me back up. Okay, so yarn over, insert, then we're going to yarn over with both of them together, and then we're going to pull up that loop with two together. Then we can go ahead and drop all the old stuff and only just yarn over with the new. And now you don't have to do it this way. If you're like, Brenda, I've changed yarn lots of times and I don't really feel like doing it that way. You just do it the way that you normally do. This way works great when you're doing a half double crochet, because it tends to, having those two together when you yarn over, it anchors the yarn just enough that it's not going to go anywhere as you're finishing up that last stitch. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and finish working across, and I will show you how to weave in ends, and then I will, just because I need to weave in these two ends and get them out of the way, and then I will do the next step. All right, here we are at the very end. Now we're going to weave in these yarn tails. So you just can thread it onto your needle, and I would do one at a time, and you're just trying to slide it into those working loops, or into those loops that you just made. And it's great if you split through your yarn instead of trying to be really careful and go inside of all your loops and not break through the yarn. It's great if you can actually snag right through some of those strands, because that's going to add a little bit more like friction to it, so it's not going to come undone. So I like to go back and forth a couple of directions before I cut my yarn, because that just really helps it not pull out later. Just like that. Okay? And you can just cut it off. And it's good to know like what side is the right side and what side's the wrong side. So right now, this is actually the wrong side of my work. If you weave it in carefully enough, then it probably doesn't matter, but it's best practice to weave in your yarn tails on the wrong side of your work, just in case it shows just a little bit. Alrighty. Gonna cut that one. Okay, so now for the next step, we are going to be working single crochet 2 together. This is a decrease stitch all the way across the top of our hat. So this is going to be the top edge here. And we are going to start by just pulling up a loop in that very first ridge. So this is what I'm telling you in the sort of instructions or the recipe. This is a ridge of V's, this is a ridge of V's, this is a ridge of V's. You guys see that? There's a picture of this in the download, just so that, in case you forget. But I place my hook right in the top of that V because it looks like it makes a continuation of that when I make my stitch. So I'm going to put my hook in the top of in that very first V along the top edge. I'm going to yarn over, pull up a loop. Then I'm going to go over to the next ridge, which is right here, and I'm going to insert my hook there, yarn over, pull up a loop, and try to keep these loops tight, you know, you still want to be able to work through them, but try to keep them fairly tight. And then you're going to yarn over, and then you're going to pull through all 3 loops. Okay, and we're going to continue to do that across the top of our hat. So, you know, this is a long stretch, so you don't want to just allow this loop to be really long here. You want to bring this right up next to your work and keep it tight. So we're going to grab a loop there from that V, and we're going to grab a loop from this V, kind of bringing them nice and close, yarn over, and pull through 3. Now we'll move to the next one. Insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop. Make sure everything's nice and tight, and pull through 3. So what we're doing is we're basically just gathering the top of our hat. Here, it makes the next step much easier when you sew up the top of the hat, because you're not really actually even sewing it secretly. All right, and then here we are. We're only working into those little columns. Okay, we're only working into those columns of V's, just pulling up a loop, making a yarn over and pulling through all 3. Pulling up a loop, and we don't have a loop here because this is our single crochet, but we're just gonna pull up a loop. I mean, we don't have those little V's, but we're just gonna pull up a loop at the edge of that stitch there where that ridge is. And you may find that you have 1 extra loop. That's fine. You can just do a regular single crochet right into the top of that loop. It just depends on how many rows you end up doing. Okay, so this is really bringing this in here. I'm gonna warm up my iron a little bit so that that's ready for me when we're ready for it. Oops, looks like I snagged my yarn. I'll do that last stitch over again. So pull up a loop here, pull up a loop here, yarn over, and pull through all of those. Okay, so now we are going to just cut our yarn. So we're going to give ourselves a little bit of extra yarn because we're going to be sort of pulling together the top of the hat, and we're going to be stitching down the side of the hat as well. All right, just cutting that off. And then I'm just going to yarn over and pull through. And this is the right side of our piece because we ended on a right side. So we're just going to bring that around like that. So this is kind of forming our tube here. And then I'm going to thread a needle with that extra long yarn tail. Let's see, Tara's asking if you wanted to change colors to have stripes, when would you change the yarn, the first stitch of a new row? Yes, I would start it on, actually, if you want to do stripes, what I would do is I would change yarn up at the top of your hat. So that would be after working rows 1 and 2, then you'd switch, because that way it'll be up at the top and where you change, and then that edge is not going to show. You want this edge to be as nice as possible because you're just going to fold it up and you're going to see that edge. So I would change after, like every other row, starting after row 2. So you'd change at the very end of row 2 when you're doing your turning chain for the next row. And then change again at the end after working row 4 when you're doing your turning chain for the following row. That's how I would do it. Okay, so we are going to just put our needle through each of these stitches at the very top. So I'm starting, so this is where the yarn tail ended, and I'm going to start right here, and then I'm just putting it through the front loop of each of those last few stitches that we worked. You could also do it under both loops if you feel like that's more secure for the type of yarn that you're using, but for me, this is going to work just fine. I have a very sturdy acrylic yarn here, so I'm not worried about it breaking. And we're just going through that very front loop on all the way around. We've made it all the way around. And now we are going to just pull on that until that circle disappears. Okay, so we've cinched it all in. So this sort of takes the place. I've seen some other hat patterns where you just make the rectangle and then you have to just weave your needle through and pull on that, but it's kind of hard to do that because you have so much thickness of the top of your hat to cinch in. So that's why I like to do that extra little row across the top in crochet where I'm kind of gathering things in, so that way you have a little bit less to run your needle through when you're pulling it all together. So I'm just putting my needle through those same loops. I'm going around in the circle a second time just to make sure that's very sturdy. You don't have to if you have a sturdy yarn. I probably didn't need to for this particular yarn, but I think it's just kind of good practice to be extra careful there. Okay, so now I'm back where I started, and this is where our seam is. So we're just gonna butt these two edges together, and there is the same amount of stitches on this side as there are on this side, so you don't even have to pin it. And we are gonna be working through, let's see, I think it's the back. I'm gonna have to double check my notes here because I can't remember if I go under both loops. I think it's under one loop because I changed this recently. I realized, okay. So I'm going to go underneath both loops. Whoops. Let's see. Just the top loop of the last row worked, but under both loops of the foundation edge. Okay. So I'm going under, this is in your little cheat sheet here. See, I even needed that. I've only done it a few ways with this seam method. You can go underneath both loops of both sides and just do a whip stitch and keep it very simple. But I found that it blended in just a little better if I went underneath just the top loop of that last row that we worked, which is here, sitting here on top, and then underneath both loops, the V of that very foundation chain, okay? And we're just gonna do a whip stitch, so top loop, both loops. Top loop, both loops. And we're just doing this whip stitch all the way down the seam in our hat. Top loop, both loops. And so seaming it this way helps to create that little ridge that's happening. You can see that ridge, and that helps it blend in with the rest of our ridges in our ribbing. Top loop and both loops. Top loop, both loops. Top loop, both loops. All right, we are about halfway there. So the next thing I want to show you, and I'll try and talk a little ahead so we don't run out of time. Oh, looks like, I think that for some projects you'd want to start a new color by making the new yarn become the last loop of the last stitch of the old color, such as if you wanted to change at the bottom edge. Okay, so yeah, what Lily is saying, so a lot of times in patterns they will have you do your last yarn over of the last stitch of the old color. So when you're working your last row of the old color, you do your very last yarn over to pull through with the new color. So that is the standard way to change color for the next row. That's the way most people do it. The way I like to do it is I finish that stitch, then I yarn over with the new color, then I pull on the old color to make the loop just disappear, the last old color loop, it snugs it up. And for me, that is actually the way that I prefer to change color because it looks very tidy there. But Lily is right, most people change on the very last yarn over of the last stitch of the old color. Hope that was not confusing. All right. Now this going through just the top loop of the one row or the one edge and under both loops will help not only when we're looking at it from this side, but also when we fold that brim up, it'll help make it look a little bit more even. So when I get to be pretty close to the edge, I like to count up my stitches. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, it should be the same amount of stitches, which it is, but if it wasn't, it is okay to go through one of the stitches twice. So like if there were more stitches here and less stitches here, you could go through one of the stitches down here twice, but going through each of these only once. And that will even it out. And I always check for something like that when I'm pretty close to the end, like about where I was a second ago, because that way when you fix it up there, it's not going to show. But if you try to fix it along the edge or close to the edge, you're probably going to get a weird little bump there. Alrighty, here's our very last stitch. Okay, and then we would weave in our ends just like we did before. And then I like to go ahead and block my hat because it will give it a lot more drape, especially if you made it in an acrylic fabric, because I like to crochet these up at a fairly dense gauge because I don't want the wind coming through. So because I'm using an acrylic, I like to use an iron and steam block my finished hat, because the heat shaping that is happening right now, basically I'm heating up all those fibers and helping them to relax in that shape. It's going to make it have a lot more drape, and it's just going to look a little better. So I would definitely recommend this. Don't skip this step, especially if you crocheted something out of acrylic and you're feeling like it's just, I don't know, like a little too stiff. Then definitely go ahead and steam it. And so you can see I'm not actually touching my hat. I'm just hovering above. If you used a wool yarn, then you would go ahead and saturate the whole piece and squeeze. You would just let it soak for maybe an hour or two until it's completely saturated. And then you would squeeze it all out as much as you can using your hands. Don't wring it or twist it or anything like that. And then just kind of arrange to have it dry on a towel. Or another method that I really like, this is what I normally do when I block a wool hat, is after I get most of the water squeezed out, and I kind of use a towel to kind of squish it out, then I will blow up a balloon and celebrate. Just kidding. I'll blow up a balloon and I put it in the top of a mug, a sturdy mug, but I want to blow my balloon up to the size of a very, very small head, like much smaller than the head that's going to be wearing the hat, because you don't want to stretch out your hat, and then you can just kind of place your hat over the balloon that's sitting in the mug, and that makes the top of your hat nice and smooth. If I am steam blocking, I have a pressing ham that I will kind of put inside of the top of my hat, and then I can steam block the top of it. I don't actually have that here, so I'm just going to show you how you can just kind of make a little, I don't know, it looks like a little mushroom cap actually, but I'm just kind of giving it a little extra steam on the top to help those relax just a little bit. And then sometimes that if you steam it a little too much like that, then you can cause some kind of wrinkliness in your hat, and then you got to kind of steam it flat again. So it might be best to do that first, but I usually like to just kind of steam the whole thing, steam the top, and then I kind of go over it again. All right, so you can see it's got a lot more drape than it did before. It was much stiffer before, and this is what it's going to look like. And I could probably work on steaming that just a little bit more to make the top a little bit, it's just a little bit bumpy here. But anyway, I want to make sure that I have time enough to show you some of my ideas for personalizing the hat. So this hat, I was thinking about sewing a patch on. So this is just an idea. I have a bunch of these patches from traveling, and I thought that it would make a really cool hat just to kind of stitch it around there with some sewing thread. But this is one of those things, like if you're gifting this to somebody, you could look for some patches. Etsy has amazing patches, if you're looking for some weird specific thing, like maybe a movie they like that's really obscure or something like that. You can find all kinds of cool things on Etsy. You can get a special little patch, doesn't cost a whole bunch of money, and then you add it to your homemade beanie, and it really makes a very thoughtful, useful gift. It isn't just something like, it's actually useful and they're going to get some wear out of it. If you just give them the patch, then they'll have to figure out what to do with it. So it's great if you get it and sew it to a hat for them. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was lining your hat. So if you make your hat out of something that's itchy, or if you make your hat out of something that doesn't have a lot of bounce back, like you can stretch it out and it just sort of gets bigger and bigger, then you might want to think about lining your hat. Normally for these hats, well, the simplest way to line these hats is only just to line the very bottom. That's the area that's touching you and it's covering your ears. That's the most important area anyway. So if you want to go ahead and line just that section, it's really, really, really easy to do. So I just want to show you that real quick. I'm not going to actually line the whole thing, but I'll kind of talk you through the steps in case this is something you're interested in doing for your hat. You would, let's see, if this was the hat that I was going to line, I would unfold it so it's normal width here, and then just make myself a little paper pattern. So draw with a pencil on this side and on this side. And then wherever I fold the top of it up, it's best if you can have it end right around that point. If you put it up here and you're hand stitching it to the inside, you might see a little shadow of where you've attached it. So it's really great if you have it end wherever the top of your little fold up brim is. So if this was the bottom of your hat, when it's folded, this was about the thickness of your brim. So you would cut out this rectangle, and then you can either cut out a second rectangle in paper and tape them together and cut your lining out all together. Or you can place your fabric on the fold, meaning you just fold your fabric along this edge and then you can cut that out, because basically what you want is two pieces that are joined together here, or really one continuous long piece that's twice as wide as this. And then before you cut that out though, you should think about whether you want to, and let's see, in this hat I rolled the edge of the fabric underneath and did a little tiny whip stitch, which I thought looked nice. But I use this very thin kind of velvety, it's almost like a stretch velvet, but it's like in between a stretch velvet and fleece, which is awesome for lining hats. I highly recommend that. It was just in the fleece section at my Joann's. But it has like spandex in it, so it really bounces back. You can see it's very stretchy. This is much more stretchy than most of the other fleeces that Joann's has. Look for this, because this is so soft and it is so stretchy, and it really helps your hat keep its shape once it's stitched in there. Plus, you don't want to add a whole bunch of bulk into your hat. You know, you don't want it to be really thick right there. It is nice for the warmth, but it kind of starts to look a little too thick when you've got the brim and then you've got the lining and everything all in one spot. So if you find a thinner fleece like this, you can actually roll over the edge and whip stitch that in. You can do that on both sides. Let me just show you. So this edge was rolled under and I did a little tiny whip stitch along the edge and one along that edge too, just barely underneath. So you can't see it when this is folded. It's maybe like a quarter of an inch up inside the hat. But before I did that, actually, before I whip stitched the edges in, I stitched it into a tube. Where is that seam? Here it is. And I just did the seam by hand because I wanted to just make sure this whole thing could be done by hand, because I know there will be people watching this who don't have a sewing machine. So I just did a little tiny stitch with the right sides together. Here, I'll show you my piece. Like if I was making, I cut this out so I could make it for this hat later. But I would put my right sides together and then just do a little running stitch across there with maybe a quarter of an inch seam allowance. So I find if you cut it out to the width of what you're drawing, the edges of your hat, and then you do that seam allowance, which makes it a little smaller, that it'll fit into your hat pretty well. So once you stitch it into a tube though, place it inside your hat and then check the fit. You can always make that seam, you know, a little bit tighter if you feel like it's if you're getting a lot of ripples or it's making your hat want to stretch out in order for this to fit, then you can definitely make it a little bit smaller before you commit to stitching the two edges in. So I just wanted to show you that. That's a very easy way to do it. Oh, and let me pull this back in here. Let's see. Oh, Julie is saying, when measuring the circumference, where do you lay the measuring tape on your head? I just place it where the bottom of my hat would be. So most people measure the circumference right around their hat and it's level like this, but I like to put it around where my hat is actually going to be going around my head. So, usually I wear my hat kind of tilted backwards so that my hat comes all the way down to the back of my neck, and then the front of my hat is up here. So I just imagine where the edge of my hat is going to be, and that's where I measure my circumference, and then I subtract 3 inches, and that seems to work great for me. So, okay, so another thing I wanted to show you are other easy ways to personalize your projects. So this one I put a giant pom-pom on because I thought that would be super cute. And then I cut out a little piece of a metallic faux leather. I poked some holes in with a sharp needle first, and then I just used yarn to whip stitch around through the edges of that, and it looks really cute. This would work great with if you used a felt, or if you have some wool yarn, you could crochet up a little swatch and you could put that in the washing machine and felt it yourself, make your own little felted piece and cut it into a heart or star or some other kind of simple shape and whip stitch it on. It just makes a cute little patch. This would be cute in leather too. This is like the simplest way, is just finding some cool buttons to sew on. The fabric store has all kinds of cool things. Or maybe you want to go to like an antique store or go find some vintage buttons. Again, Etsy is a great resource. Just think about the personality of the person who's going to be wearing the hat. You want to make sure that it's something they're actually going to want to wear, and it kind of speaks to their personality, what you're going to be adding to it. And there's no shame in giving them a completely plain beanie, like that is just the beanie, no doodads, no buttons, whatever, because some people would really prefer that. They don't need a lot of stuff on their hat. Okay, so that's where you personalize something like that, is you could personalize it with a little bit of a lining on the inside, something that they like. It's not going to show, but they would know it was in there. Or, just choosing the yarn type, the yarn colors, making sure that you're choosing a yarn that they can care for. Don't make it in a really nice wool that you have to hand wash if you know they're not going to hand wash it. They're just going to throw it in the washing machine, and it's going to be for a tiny little doll after that. All right, so let's talk about this one. This is for one of my kids. She really wanted a hat to look like a cactus. So I just made up the beanie, and then I did these some little whip stitches, and I made sure that the whip stitches, they stop at this point on this side, but then they start here on this side. Okay, so they're not all the way up there. So you have to have it on both sides of the beanie in order to be able to see them when this brim comes up. And then the flower, it wouldn't have to necessarily be a cactus either. Like, you could make this cute flower and just add it to a different kind of a beanie. But this flower can be found, oh, excuse me. This flower, there's a little write-up in here about how I made the flower. I used the same process that I used in a video that's on the Creative Crochet Corner website. It's called 3D Flower. And I just chained extra stitches to begin, so I did more repeats of it, and then I made like a little picot to make the little tips of it stick out, and I explain how to do that. So in your little download. So if you're interested in making exactly this and you want to make this kind of flower look exactly like that, there's instructions between here, and then also on the website there's a video of me showing you how to make the 3D flower. And then I also tell you in the download how to make the little flower center as well, to add that in there. So that was kind of a fun one. And then this one, let's talk about this one. This one is for one of my kids, and she really likes rock and roll. She really wanted to look kind of punk rock, so I had some of these little studs that I added, which are really easy to add through your crochet pieces. But in order to kind of reinforce them and make sure that they weren't going to just come out, I remove these pins. I hand stitched a little piece of just like a t-shirt fabric to the back. Let me pull out this pin here too. There we go. I hand stitched a little piece of t-shirt yarn to the back so that I could fasten the studs through. So the studs, they come like this, in case you've never used these before. These are just pyramid studs, and they have 2 prongs. They're mostly used for piercing through leather or other thick things. You just poke it through. I'm not actually going to affix this, but I'll show you how it works. You just poke it through wherever you want it to be. The little ends come through like that, and then I usually use a flathead screwdriver, and I place the flathead right there and push one prong in, and then I go to the other side and push the other prong in. That's how I usually fasten my studs, just with the regular flathead screwdriver, just pushing those prongs in. And if you add this fabric, that gives it something to grip to, so it's not going to just kind of pull out of your fabric. Another reason that you would want to put this t-shirt fabric on the inside I like to put it on the inside of the brim, is because then if you get a pin like this enamel pin here, then you have something that's really going to grip to, and it's, you know, it's not just going to be pulling on a couple of little pieces of yarn here at this point. It's going to be a little more substantial to push it through that fabric. And then I just used safety pins, because what's more punk rock than that, to make sure that the brim doesn't fall down, because these are pretty light, but this enamel pin is actually kind of secretly kind of heavy. And all that stuff on the brim right there, it might actually, or, you know, if she's running around, it might start to kind of flip over this way because there is that little extra bit of weight there, so I use those. But if you're not, you know, if you just want to put the t-shirt fabric on the back and add a cute little enamel pin, something like this, to the hat, then you can go ahead and just tack your brim together on either side of where you're going to put the pin and slide that in there, because you want the backings of the pin to be between the brim and the hat. You don't want the pin to go all the way through, because then you're going to have these pokey little things sticking into your forehead, which is no fun. So you want to make sure that you can just tack it in a couple little places, or you can even tack it up here along the edge of the brim, just so that this can't fall down if you've got kind of a heavy enamel pin like this. Those little button pins, you know, the little round ones with the one little pin back that comes across, those are really light, and you would not need to worry about keeping it from flopping down. But just for these kind of heavier things that you're going to add to it too. So the last thing I wanted to show you, just really quickly, is I'm writing on this hat right here, and I've done quite a few tutorials on using a needle felting or a felting pen to add if you're using a felting or a feltable wool that you crocheted out of, and then you can use just strands of wool, and you can use a felting pen to just basically write on your project. I've done this a few times. Most recently I did it in the for the Creative Crochet Corner. I made a Christmas stocking. I think it's called Cable Christmas Stocking, and I showed you how to write somebody's name on it. You could use that same method on a hat and write whatever you want, or in this case I wanted to show you what would happen if you were using an acrylic and you didn't have anything, you couldn't felt it. So you can just use chain stitch embroidery to just write whatever you want to on the brim of your hat. And I use two different colors to kind of make it look like there's a little bit of a shadow, so it makes the word kind of pop out at you. And in case you're wondering what this is about, because maybe you're not from here, this is kind of like a local thing that we say, oh, like when you bump into someone at the store, we go, oh, and it kind of means like, oops, sorry, or excuse me, but we just say, oh, and it's just kind of funny. So that's what that's about there. All right, let me just check in with you guys real quick. Let's see. Okay, I'm gonna make a hat as a gift for my brother. How can I know if I have it the right size? Okay, so I would suggest if you can measure your brother or have him measure you, maybe have him do it in a video so you can see if he's doing it the way that I showed you. You can do that, or you can probably, unless you know your brother has like a really large head or really small head, you could probably just measure another adult hat. Most hats, this is a very stretchy stitch pattern, and it will probably fit most people if you make it all one size. You could also go to the store and measure men's hats. If you don't have any hats like that at your house, you could just bring your little measuring tape in and kind of measure the hat, and then make it to the same dimensions as that. Or you can ask to borrow a hat of his, or you can you could trace a hat of his onto a piece of paper. That might work too. Ashley says, I'm gonna make a hat as a gift for my brother. How can I know? Oh, we just went through that, sorry. We already answered that one. Okay, Wanda is saying I have a problem when attaching a pom-pom to the top, making sure it stands up straight. So it could be that your pom-pom doesn't have enough yarn in it, or maybe if you're using this kind of a pom-pom, if all the fur is kind of going one direction, you can use a hair dryer from a ways away to kind of warm up your pom-pom. Be careful though, you don't want to melt it. So you got to go from a ways away and kind of come in, and that heat will reshape your pom-pom. Not exactly sure. Okay, let's see. I think I've answered most of the questions. Oh, do you have any lessons for a 10-year-old? She wants to learn to crochet. I want to know, but I want her to learn the simple things first. We actually do have a bunch of lessons that I teach called 14 Days Learn to Crochet on the Creative Crochet Corner website, and that is a great place to start. So I would just check that out. And I lead you through working back and forth and turn rows, working in the round, and some simple projects and that sort of thing. All right, looks like we are out of time. This has been a really fun project to do, fun to teach. Thank you guys so much for being so present in the chat box. That was really awesome today to see all you guys in there. And I hope you guys have some fun freestyling your own beanies. Bye, everybody.